Well, tēnā koutou katoa, no America ho na te tematanga, no otatahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tunga mahi o Parry Field Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toku ingoa, no reira nā mihi kia koutou katoa. It's wonderful to see so many of you gathered here, lots of enthusiasm for the Incorporated Societies Act and the changes which have come about. My name is Stephen Moe, and I'm a partner at Parry Field Lawyers, and I'm lucky to be joined by Sophie today. So you are here online with a laptop next to us as well. So in the chat, you're going to notice that we are dropping links to resources and information that we think would be helpful for you. So Sophie's doing that in the chat there. And at the start, before we hit record, I asked, what's the weather like around the country? So it's good. Thank you, Penny. It's sunny in Hamilton. That's good to know. One of the reasons for doing that is that now we know that you all can use the chat function. So we would love for this to be as interactive as possible. We would love to have you asking questions in the chat. And we would love to hear what it is that's concerning you about the new act, or how to register, and what is it that's on your mind. The reason is that we view this as a way to get directly from the coalface what are people facing. And if you signed up for this, you probably saw our Incorporated Societies Act information hub. And on the FAQ there's more than 115 questions and answers. So if you put a question in the chat, we will probably use it as material to then generate an answer. But bear in mind, there are a lot of answers that we've already put up on the website. So what we're going to do today is we are going to tell you just a little bit of the history for how we got to this point. We're going to tell you what it is that's changing. And then we're going to run through what we think are the top 10 things that you need to know about the re-registration. Now, we're aware that on this call, there's going to be some of you who are officers of incorporated societies. There's going to be some of you who are involved in the governance or the running of the incorporated society. There's going to be some of you who are fellow lawyers, or you might be an accountant or a professional giving advice to incorporated societies. I think there's even some government departments here. So there's a wide variety of people. So just bear that in mind. What we're trying to do is tailor our content for a real spread of many, many people. But we will cover everything that we think that you need to know. And we encourage those questions so that we can make sure this session is really tailored to this audience. So that is what we're going to do today. Now, whenever we start these sessions, it's always good to ask a question, which is the glass half full or the glass half empty question. You could be approaching this session and the requirements with a glass half empty perspective, which is, oh no, we've got to do some re-registration. We've got to have rules. We've got to revise our rules. What does this mean? But I'd encourage you to have a glass half full attitude, which is, this is an opportunity to refresh our organization, to have a good hard look at our rules and ask, are they appropriate? Do they need updating? Why is this in our rules anyway? Because I think for the vast majority of you, these entities were often set up decades ago, and they were appropriate at that time in 1972 or in 1987 or in 2003, but things have moved on. So the point is, have the attitude of, this is an opportunity for our club or incorporated society to actually have a fresh perspective and introduce things which will benefit us for the long term. Because ultimately, why are we here? It's about purpose and it's about impact. So everything that we do should be about advancing those two things. So this is an opportunity for you to really upgrade and get your entity really humming in terms of governance and decision making. And this might actually be an opportunity to go out to the community and remind people of the amazing work that you're doing. So view it in that lens. Like, before we dive into the detail here, I'd encourage you to have that sort of an attitude. And that attitude, an infectious glass half full attitude, people are going to notice that. They're going to want to get on board and be involved in what you're doing. So the other thing, we have some slides. We're not showing them on the screen, but we will email them out to you after this. So please, of course, taking notes might mean that you are understanding as we're talking, but equally, we do have quite detailed notes, and we're going to be emailing those out to you. And the reason that we're doing that is that we really want to resource this sector. We want you to have an understanding of what's required, and we want you to have an understanding of the changes that you need to be thinking about now. All right, so history lesson. If we were to go back in time, what would we find? Let's go back to 1895, shall we? Why not? This is the original legislation, 1895 Unclassified Societies Registration Act. It's the model of how simplified things could be. 3 pages, and that set out everything about what was called societies or friendly societies and unclassified societies. There's 18 sections. If we go to the Incorporated Societies Act 1908, so that's the one that you're more familiar with probably, you can tell there's a few more pages here, but not that big. Let's jump to 2022 and we get this. There's about 270 sections, and looking at it, this is about 133 pages. So the point is, there's been a big change in terms of the content of the old act to the new act. Now you might be saying, what's all this new stuff? What's this about? Actually, what they were doing was codifying. So that means taking what was already the law, codifying, writing it down, and putting it into a legislation, which is this Incorporated Societies. And the reason for that is, how many of you on this call put in the chat if you were alive in 1908, right? Like, that's a long, long time ago. Things have changed since 1908. So this whole area needed an upgrade. It needed a change in describing what's required for incorporated societies. So that's the big picture, like the overarching scheme of history. That's where we're sitting in it. And the other thing to mention is that this is going to impact every incorporated society. So Sophie, maybe do you want to tell us a little bit about how many societies are we talking about, and what's the time frame of what they need to do?
Absolutely, Stephen. So there are around 24,000 incorporated societies in New Zealand, and the changes under the new Act affect every one of them. So in terms of next steps from here, you need to re-register under the 2022 Act in order to remain an incorporated society. And there's no need to panic. You don't need to push the panic button. The re-registration period is open from October, so last month, until April 2026. So there's a 2.5-year window for all incorporated societies to re-register. And it is really important that you do re-register, because if you don't, then your incorporated society will cease to exist. So quite an important date to remember, but there is plenty of time with that 2.5-year period.
Yeah, it's kind of fundamental, really. If you don't do it, then you won't exist. The other thing about the time frame is, it is a long time, like October 2023 to April 2026. But having said that, if you think about it, that's only 2 AGM cycles. So I'm really glad that all of you are on this call, because it's good to think about this now and to start working with your members and talking with your officers, because it's going to go by quickly. Like 2024, 2025, ooh, we need to have re-registered. So there is time, but equally, don't just sit on what needs to happen. Yeah, and also don't rush it. I think don't rush at the end. I think at the end of the period, there's probably going to be a massive number of people who hadn't re-registered, and then they're all going to come at once. So now's probably the quietest time, and you could go ahead and get things ready and go ahead and re-register. So that would be I guess kind of my encouragement is don't leave it to the last minute. But fortunately, you all are on this call, so we know that you are already thinking ahead, which is great. We endorse that. Well, we're going to run through the top 10 changes. As we do this, please put in the comments, what is your question? Give us the hard questions. We want some really difficult ones. We're getting too many easy ones now. We want to know what is at the forefront of your mind. How can we help you to answer your questions? So please use the chat, drop some comments, some questions, and we'd love to know those. So we're going to go through now just the top 10 things that we think you need to consider. We're also, after that, we're going to talk about the re-registration, what that actually requires. So I think we're going to go through this a little bit faster than we normally do. I think so, because I think this group of people, I'm sure that they've got some good questions for us. Perfect. And I want to leave enough time for that. So the first question, I'll do that one. New rules are required. Now you might be saying, oh, but we just updated our rules 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Like, we just did this. Do we have to? And the answer is you do. The reason is that the new act has a whole section, which is section 26, if you want to look it up. It says, what are the requirements for your constitution, otherwise called your rules? It covers things like membership, governance, general meetings, amendment procedures, dispute resolution procedures, name, purposes, winding up. I can guarantee that most of you on this call have most of those things already. But I can also guarantee that very few of you have all of those things. So we're reviewing dozens and dozens and dozens of rules for entities. And that's actually one way we can support people like you. And when we go through is we're finding, oh, you're missing this part. Oh, you need this part in order to be able to re-register. So that's the first thing, is you're going to have new rules. Now with that, actually, you have a choice. Number one, do we adapt our existing rules? So recognizing the history, we want to keep the wording we've always had, or do we adopt brand new rules? So we're helping some groups to just completely redo, and we have a template with what we think is the best practice for rules. So some groups are saying, we just want to do that. Other groups are saying, we want to tweak our existing wording. So it's down to your context, really. What will your members think? Would they prefer just having a new set of rules, or do they kind of love their rules and they get them out and read them? And so you want to keep the legacy of what's there. So that's change number one. New rules are required.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Change number two is that a committee is now required. So believe it or not, under the 1908 Act, a society didn't actually need to have a committee. It only needed to have officers. So now under the new Act, a society must have a committee, which comprises of 3 or more qualified officers. So this is a great example of where there's something in the new Act that actually a lot of societies will be doing in practice. The committee is the governing group of the society. It doesn't need to be called a committee. You might call it the board or something along those lines, but you need one under the new Act. Now, who is a qualified officer? Well, section 47 of the new Act sets out the definition of an officer, which includes that they must be a natural person, a real human being. They must have consented in writing to being an officer, so they can't just be voted in at a meeting that they're not in attendance of. And they also must have certified that they're not disqualified under the new Act. Now, there's a long list of disqualifications under the Act, but they're actually really similar to disqualifications under laws that regulate other entities like companies. So it's things like they can't be an undischarged bankrupt or have committed certain crimes. So that is change number two.
Yeah, that's great. Change number three. How many of you are officers? If we were all live and in the same room, I'd get you to raise your hand. How many of you are officers? So officers, you now have duties. Well, no, I should say you've always had duties. It's just now that they are written in the Act. So some people have gotten confused on this point and said, oh, is this new things that we have to do? Actually, this is what was called the common law about duties. It's now been codified, written down in the Act. So that's at sections 54 to 61. Some of you will be involved in companies, and you will probably, if you've ever looked at the Companies Act and seen director duties, you'll recognize there's kind of a echoing of terminology from the Companies Act director duties over to these duties. So it's things like duty to act in good faith and in the society's best interests, duty to exercise powers for a proper purpose, duty to comply with the Act and with the Constitution. There's a general duty of care, a duty not to create substantial risk of serious loss for creditors, and a duty not to incur obligations that you can't perform. So my encouragement is that this is actually an opportunity for officers, for the governance, to refresh and be aware that with the power comes responsibility. There is some requirements on how you act, and they're now codified, they're set out in that those sections. So it's good to be aware of those. Number 4.
Thank you, Stephen. Number 4 is changes to membership. So there are a few changes to membership under the new Act. One of them is that under the current Act, you may be aware that you need 15 members in order to register as an incorporated society. So this has changed under the new Act. It's only 10 members. And under both Acts, a body corporate, like another incorporated society or a charitable trust, is treated as 3 members for the purpose of counting the number of members. So under the 1908 Act, it was 15 members to register, and now it's only 10. But this 10 membership minimum, it's actually a continuous minimum membership requirement. So an incorporated society under the new Act must always have at least 10 members. So this will definitely be something for smaller societies to keep an eye on, and the amalgamation provisions that we're going to talk about a little later could be helpful with this 10 membership minimum. And it might also be a reason to increase your membership, to talk to family or friends, or have a membership drive in order to keep with that minimum requirement. So if a society does go below that 10-member minimum, then they do actually have 6 months to remedy that. So it's not as soon as you go below 10 members that you're off. You've got time to sort that out, which is great. And there are a few other requirements for membership that have been introduced. So like with officers, members must consent to become a member of the society. This could be a membership application, or it might be an email exchange, whatever it is that your society wants to do, but a member does need to consent to becoming a member. And a society must also keep a register of members with details such as the name of the member, their contact details, and the date that they became a member. So these sorts of things are helpful for a society to have, right? It's helpful to have a register of members and for members to agree to become a member. So that's just another example of how the new Act is really just putting good governance into practice.
Yep, that's great. All right, and we're just getting through this. So the next one is conflict of interest procedures. So the new Act does introduce conflict of interest procedures, and it requires officers to disclose when they're interested in a matter. So I think this is really best practice. You should be doing this anyway, but it's now written into the rules. So this is, think of the context. I'm an officer. I also own a catering company, and the incorporated society wants to use the catering company to provide the food for the next event or something. Clearly, I'm conflicted because I'm getting paid in my other role. So I need to declare it, disclose it, have it entered into the conflict of interest register, not be involved in that decision. Hopefully that's straightforward. But the other thing is that we live in small communities, so you might have multiple conflicts on a board. If more than half of the committee was conflicted, then you would have to go to calling a special general meeting and ask for a decision to be made. So, yeah, conflict of interest.
Thank you, Stephen. Change number 6, over halfway, is dispute resolution procedures. So under the new Act, a society's constitution must include dispute resolution procedures, including provision for how complaints can be made. So a dispute resolution procedure, what the they're looking for under the new Act is sort of a procedure to resolve any sort of conflict or complaint between members, between an officer and a member, between the society and members, or any sort of combination of those. So they're internal procedures that are looking to resolve disputes. So if a society's constitution doesn't include dispute resolution procedures, then it will be treated as including the procedures set out in the Act. So Schedule 2 of the Act helpfully sets out some default dispute resolution procedures that your society might choose to adopt, or you might have your own dispute resolution procedures, which you could include in your constitution. They just need to be consistent with natural justice. So what we mean by natural justice is they've got to give people a right to be heard. So it can't just be that a judgment's passed on somebody. They have to have an opportunity to present their case. So you could adopt the procedures set out in the Act. You might have your own procedures, or we've worked with our litigation team to come up with some well-rounded dispute resolution procedures as well. So there's lots of options out there, but at the end of the day, you will need some process for dealing with complaints under the new Act.
Yep.
Over to you, Stephen.
Great. The next one, some of you are probably accountants, so this is an exciting one, financial reporting. Part 3, subpart 7 of the new Act introduces some new accounting standards, and the incorporated society is going to need to prepare financial statements according to the standard that suits the size of their society. So I think this is actually really positive. It's kind of an approach that's happening across the board, which is we're not going to treat a tier 1 charity, so a really big one, the same as we treat a tier 4 charity, which is obviously much smaller. So the Act is also explicit about the standard for small societies. So that's less than 50,000 a year. And so that's good. There's actually kind of a carve out for really small ones. And I think that's appropriate, because there will be some groups that are, very, very small. So if you're interested in that, Companies Office have put out some really detailed guidance about financial reporting. And also the XRB, I'm involved on the XRB advisory panel, and I know that they've put out some guidance for charities and for people wondering about reporting. So there is good information out there. All right, nearly there.
Wow. Number 8 is amalgamation. So I hinted at it before, but this is something that is introduced under the new Act. So what it is it's a procedure for 2 societies either joining into one society or one society joining into the other. So it's a process for 2 societies to become one, basically, because this wasn't under the old Act. And especially with that 10 membership minimum, it'll be really helpful to have under the new Act. So it's a simplified version of the procedures set out in the Companies Act, if any of you are familiar with those procedures, and it will allow societies to join together much more easily. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't apply until you're re-registered under the 2022 Act. So that's a real shame, because you can't use that process in order to register.
We actually campaigned that it should apply before, because think of all the small societies who it would be great if they came together, and instead they're going to have to re-register and then use the provisions. But we did what we could.
Absolutely, we did.
Yeah.
And it will be available going forward, which is helpful. Back over to you, Stephen.
All right. Yeah, last 2. Just before I talk about these last 2, one of the things that I'm trying to start as a movement, and I invite you to join me, is quite often people talk about not-for-profits. I'm wanting to flip the terminology, because I think we're conceiving these organizations in the wrong light. Think about it. Not is the first word, a negative, not. And what are we comparing it to? For profit, as if profit was the ultimate aim that we should be aiming. The whole sector is not for profit. Why do we talk like that? So anyway, I'm trying to encourage people like you to think about reconsidering and talking about for-purpose organizations. So we are involved in a for-purpose organization or entity. I just think it's a more positive framework. And a shout out to Sophie, who's doing multiple tasks, as you can tell in the chat. She's put a link to an article I did on this topic. So if it's of interest to you, feel free to click the link, have a read of the article, help me to share it. If it resonates, feel free to post it on LinkedIn or somewhere and tag me in. I will reply and comment, because I'd like more people to find out about this concept. But that doesn't relate to number 9, which is enforcement. So enforcement, part 4 of the new act sets out the civil law enforcement provisions that explicitly state what orders a court can make. So this is quite helpful. It's if a member of a society wants to go to court, it's now very clear what the next steps would be, what can be enforced. So that is number 9. And the last one, the most exciting.
Oh, absolutely. We always joke that we like to end on a high note with offences. So we're sure that none of these will ever apply to you, but we just want to make sure that everybody's aware that there are offences under the Act. So there are infringement offences, which are less serious and include matters such as failing to notify the registrar of amendments to the Constitution. So a society that commits an infringement procedure offence may be liable to a fine not exceeding $3,000. And then there are also some serious offences that are set out in the new Act, such as making false statements, or fraud or falsification of the register. Now, just to be really clear, these aren't new. They're not introducing new liability. They're actually just supplementing the dishonesty provisions in the Crimes Act. So they're really just restating something that already applied to incorporated societies.
Yeah.
And some of these offences could result in a fine of up to $200,000 or a term of imprisonment of up to 5 years. So something to be aware of. Don't commit fraud, but
it's always a good idea.
It is, isn't it?
That should be our advice. Just don't do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Embezzlement, fraud, negligence. Yeah. So hopefully that's been helpful. That's just a run through of the top 10. I'd love to, oh, that link isn't working.
Oh,
It may, because I updated that website recently. So yeah. Yeah. So oh, someone else found it.
Oh.
There we go. Wow. Yeah, so it's an episode of a podcast I do called Seeds. I've interviewed more than 377 people now, and one of them I made that article into an episode of Seeds. So that's what Li Chen has found. So thanks for that. All right, now we just wanted to touch. It'd be great. We'd love to have some questions. I haven't seen many coming through the chat yet, so please do put them. We're going to turn to those in a second. What now? So if you do you want to tell us what now in terms of what's a list of things that they need to know before they hit re-register? What are they going to get asked?
That is a great question. First of all, re-registration is free, which is great. There were some discussions around charging for it during the regulation process, but it's free. So that's wonderful. The key thing that you will need to get sorted before you re-register is your constitution. So you'll need to update your constitution so that it complies with the new Act. And as Stephen mentioned, that's something that we're available to help with if that's something that you need. Other information that you'll need to provide on re-registration is your society's name, confirmation that your society has the minimum number of members, so 10 members, the constitution, as I mentioned, your balance date, contact details for your society, and details of committee members as well. So I'll pop a link to the Companies Office website, which has a lot of helpful information on next steps, but those are the steps for re-registration. So the key point is to sort out your constitution, and beyond that, hopefully you'll have all that information there and ready to go.
Yeah.
Back over to you, Stephen.
Great. Now, one of the things that we want to raise is, it's actually kind of a hard question, but the question is, should you re-register? And the reason that we ask that question is you have to do quite a lot of work to update your rules. You have to submit documents to re-register. Is the Incorporated Societies model the correct model for your group? The reason I ask it that way is sometimes we're finding groups were set up 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 70 years ago. And at the time, society was different. There was a volunteer ethos. There was a member-led ethos where people did join as members of groups. They came and they contributed. They voted. But over time, a group that had 300 people in 1971 today has shrunk to 7 people sitting around a table, continuing to do the good work, but really struggling to get members in the way and member engagement in the same way. So the question is, if you have to re-register, there's some work you need to do. Should you re-register, or should you set up a different entity type, which is more appropriate for the changed circumstances and the changes in society, to be frank? So we've helped a number of groups transitioning from incorporated society to a charitable trust. A charitable trust has a group of governance. They make decisions. They are all about advancing the purpose. It's relatively nimble and easy. And so some groups have said, actually, we're kind of tired of having yearly elections. We're not getting the same engagement as we used to. It's probably better if we're housed within a charitable trust structure. So that's just something to throw out there. I have one little horror story to tell you, which is democracy is great. I'm not going to speak against democracy, but what can happen, well, I've seen it happen. Friday night, president of Incorporated Society calls me, hey, Stephen, we've got our AGM tomorrow. Just letting you know, I'll let you know on Monday how it goes. Hey, really good news. On Wednesday, we had 35 new members join. Isn't that amazing? Really shows a real spark. You know, the future is bright. On Monday morning, I get a phone call from the president of the Incorporated Society. It's a different voice. What's going on? New 35 people came. They voted out the old executive. They voted in all of their friends and their new approach. And the Incorporated Society is now going this way. Or even worse, the worst case I've heard of this is the first decision of the new executive is to wind up the Incorporated Society. So hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but it has happened. And if your Incorporated Society, particularly if it's asset rich, if it owns a property, or if it has a lot of money in a bank account, is there the potential where this could happen to you? There's actually a takeover. So by contrast, charitable trusts are quite stable. There's no elections. There's no politics of in the same way. You can build in membership in a charitable trust model. So some people say, oh, but it's not the same. But you can take the best bits of Incorporated Society and put it into a charitable trust model. So we just offer that as an option for you to think about. I actually think it's incumbent on you, for good governance, to consider all of your options before you hit the re-register button, and to have at least raised it with the officers. Now, the answer for many of you is going to be, no, we're fine. Everything's good. We should just stay. But I can guarantee, given the number of people on this call, for some of you, actually asking that hard question, it might be appropriate to think about, what would that look like? If you did transition, then you could keep your charity services number, but you would be a new entity. So you would have to get a new IRD number, bank account. You'd have to transfer your insurance across. Your employees would change if you have any. So it's not a simple thing, but like I say, it might be appropriate to think about it and to at least ask that question. So yeah, I saw the comments in the chat, and we are sending out these slides, and we do have some notes by these different points. So that is what we want to say in terms of the content. We're going to turn to the chat and have a look at any questions that have come up. Just before we do that, we do have some resources that we wanted to alert you to. Now, you all, this is the first group we'll send it to, I think. You are lucky, because we have had a guide for incorporated societies, it used to look like this, but we have completely rewritten it, and it is now called Navigating Re-Registration, and it looks like this. So we literally haven't sent this out yet. It's an expanded version of what we've talked about today, the 10 things you need to be aware of, but then we also go into the detail about re-registration. And we've put in all of the FAQs. There's about 115 of them in this. So we're going to email that to you, and that should help you. That's our hope. And then other resources. We just like to provide free resources for the sector, the for-purpose sector. So there's that. We've also done a book called Laying Foundations for Reimagining Business. This is for those of you, because I know you wear multiple hats. If any of you are interested in what's the role of business in our society, or maybe you have a subsidiary of your incorporated society, that's all about that. We also have this one called Social Enterprise in New Zealand, a legal handbook. So that's a way to diversify funding streams, thinking about business. We have this resource called Charities in New Zealand, a legal handbook. And we go into everything we think that you need to know to run a charity really well. And we also have some kind of specific things, but we've got something for faith-based groups. So some of you may be from a faith-based group, or you may know someone. This is 7 principles of governance for faith-based groups. And we also have one for churches, so a church's legal handbook. The point of this, I don't expect you to remember all this, but the point is that there's a lot of free resources that we're putting out there. And the Information Hub, I think you probably would have seen it if you signed up for this, but we're continually updating it with new videos, new articles, new FAQs. So check those things out. And in the chat, I just put the Seeds link. So that's a podcast that has 377 interviews. The last person I interviewed was Tatipine O'Regan. So talking to him, he's 83 years old. Tell me about your life. What have you learned? Amazing to have 2 hours talking with one of the preeminent New Zealanders about what they've done and who influenced them. The other resource to draw to your attention is about governance. So I do a podcast for the Institute of Directors, and that's called Board Matters. Season 2 is just in the process of being released now. The season 1 had 13 interviews with experienced governance, and season 2 has 7 interviews with really amazing people about governance and leadership. So you're going to drop that in. You can check it out. It's in Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all those places. I really enjoyed doing it. I'm a facilitator for the IOD, so I help them present about legal issues for those in governance. That's actually a 4-hour session in what's part of the CDC, the Company Director course. But if any of you do that, I might see you there. So those were the key points that we wanted to raise. The other thing, we have an email list called the Impact email list. We've got about 900 people that get regular updates from us. And in it, it's basically just my musings and things that I think are relevant for people like you. So it's, oh, this is coming up, or here's an interesting free webinar, or there's an article I read, it was helpful. If you'd like to join that, then just hit reply on the email that had the link for this, and then I'll make sure that you're added to that. It's not a spammy one. It's just every couple of weeks, I'll send an update with, here's some interesting information for you. I think that is that part done. Let's turn to, what have we got? Have we got some hard questions? Some quick fire ones, or some, do you want to?
I think it might be helpful to start with Stephen, just explaining the difference between an incorporated society, a charitable trust, a charitable society, and charities registration. Okay. So there seems to be some confusion around how it all works.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, let's start with, who are we talking about? There's 3 government departments that you need to know about. The first is Companies Office. They're the one who administer incorporated societies. They also have the Register of Charitable Trusts. Some people get confused. Are we a charitable trust, or are we an incorporated society? In fact, we had someone who came and said, we're an incorporated society. We looked at their rules and they were a charitable trust, but they had registered as an incorporated society. So people can get confused. If you're not sure, just drop us a line. We're both, hopefully you get the sense from this, we're both pretty into this, and we're happy to have short, free conversations with any of you. I know that's not normal. Like, you might be surprised to hear that from a lawyer's mouth, but it's true. If you have a quick question, we're happy to just jump on a call and answer it. So anyway, company's office, they incorporate the entity. So you get a business number. That's good to do because it protects you in governance. Second is charities services. That's who you apply to become a registered charity. So there's 24,000 incorporated societies. There's about 8,000 registered charities who are incorporated societies. So they're different things. You can be both, but you might not be a registered charity. So some of you on this call will only be incorporated societies incorporated with company's office. You might not be a registered charity. So you might say, well, why would I register as a charity? It's usually because of the community benefits. People will recognize you and they'll be like, oh, you're in the club. I will deal with you. Reputation. And the second reason is often the tax benefits. So you don't pay tax when you're a charity. And if someone gives you money, they can get 1/3 back. So those are the first two entities. The third one is the IRD. They're the ones that actually grant you the tax position of being a registered charity. So if you think about a funnel, we might start with, say, 10 incorporated societies, but only 5 of them become registered charities. So, or 2 of them, or 1 of them, or none of them. Many groups in New Zealand are not registered charities, but they are incorporated societies. So hopefully that helps set the framework a little bit. Yeah. Was there another bit to that question? Or was that?
So we've just had a few questions.
Okay, let's run through them.
Great. So we've got a question. We are a community-led project and not a registered charitable organisation. What are the benefits of becoming an incorporated society?
Yeah, so I would say the first benefit is that you get an identity that is beyond the individuals. So right now, if there's, say, 10 of you or 15 of you, people would talk about you like, oh, there's that group that does composting over there. They're amazing, yeah. But as soon as you incorporate, you become the Christchurch Composting Club. All of a sudden, it's like an identity gets formed. So then the benefit of that is you go to the local council. It's not just a group of friends who are doing something. It's we are an entity and we would like funding. So it's easier to get that funding. Also, it reduces the liability of the people involved. So if, for example, you had 15 people and you want to lease somewhere, each of those people would need to be on the lease agreement because there's no entity. But once you incorporate and you become an incorporated society, the entity itself goes on the lease agreement and therefore is liable to pay the fees or the rent or whatever. So it's actually beneficial to reduce the liability of the individuals involved. So those are just some of the reasons. Because incorporated societies are good. I just think that they're mainly best for member-led organizations like cricket clubs and rugby clubs and groups that have a large base. I see them used sometimes when I think a charitable trust might be more appropriate. So, but I don't want to put them down. They're a good vehicle as well.
That's great. And we had another question from somebody who's the chair of a sport and recreation club and is aware of a number of unincorporated groups, which is structured that way because that's the way they've always done it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to those groups? Would it be the same advice?
Well, it's going to be very similar. And the way that I usually frame this is it's actually about the liability of the individuals involved. So, I mean, if you're but if you're a walking club, and there's 40 people that gather and they go walk in the local park, like there's probably not much money involved. There's probably not much risk involved. There's not going to be much liability involved. So just stay as you are. It's just a group of people. Yeah. But once you get a little bit further down the road and you're like, well, actually, we want to lease a space, or we want to have a contract to design a website, or we want to employ someone. At that point, you probably need to have an entity. Like, for example, what would the bank account be under? So you need an entity to set up a bank account rather than having it be in Stephen Moe's name, you know? So yeah, I think that would be my suggestion, but happy to have a chat with that person if they would like. We can have a conversation. We've helped sports clubs become incorporated societies. We've done that before. Sports clubs, as a side note, it is a little bit harder to become a registered charity if you're dealing with what's considered to be professional or elite sport. It really needs to be about children and community benefits to be able to get in the club of being a charity. So just bear that in mind. But I see the note there, kids are involved, so it's probably going to qualify not only as an incorporated society, but also as a charity. Then you don't pay tax. You can give donation receipts to people. Yeah.
Sounds good. We've had a couple of questions about societies that are incorporated into the Charitable Trusts Act. So one of them is somebody who is registered as a society under the Charitable Trusts Act and also registered as a charity with charity services.
Yeah.
What are the pros and cons of registering as an incorporated society? And then a similar question, societies registered under the Charitable Trusts Act can remain under that act and do not need to re-register. How many of these are there in New Zealand, and why or why not should they re-register?
Yeah. Oh, those are great questions.
Yeah.
My personal feeling, okay, so you can have your view as well. My feeling is that I would rather that a charitable trust is registered as a charitable trust rather than in the past. Well, you can't actually do it anymore. So in the past, some charitable trusts were registered as incorporated societies. But I just think there's an alignment that incorporated societies should be registered as incorporated societies. Charitable trusts should be registered as charitable trusts. But the person who wrote one of those comments is absolutely right. And if you need a job, come and work for us, because there is an exception in limited situations where there was some crossover between trusts and incorporated societies. I think it's a little bit too detailed and won't affect everybody on the call, but I'm happy to talk about that more with people. But they are trying to tidy that up. And I guess I would encourage, if you are a charitable trust, then you need to revisit your rules as well, because the Trusts Act 2019 came into force, and that has new provisions that apply to trustees. So some people are confused on that front, but yeah, there's a bit of detail there that the people who put those comments, if you want to reach out, we're happy to engage a bit more.
Absolutely. We've had a question on when a society is getting their rules changed, do they need to abide by their current quorum rules? Because it can be hard to get everyone into the room.
Well, do you want to take that one? Because there is some specific requirement. There's some specific rules about this. So,
but I don't think they cover quorum requirements.
The quorum, yeah. Is it more about the
meetings?
meetings?
It's more about the so the new act in Schedule 1 sets out the procedures for adopting a constitution in order to re-register, and basically the idea of this is to make it a lower threshold, more straightforward for societies to adopt a new constitution. And believe it or not, we have seen societies that don't have amendment provisions in their constitution. They're that old. So that's what this covers. So that way a society can adopt new rules. But what does it say? It says that every amendment to a society's existing rules must be made in writing and approved at a general meeting of the society by a majority vote of those members entitled to vote. So it doesn't lower the quorum requirements. So I think it'd just be the quorum requirements set out in your constitution. Yeah.
But this is an interesting point. Like this person's raised a good thing, which is my point really is that model the best one? If you're struggling to meet quorum, and if you're struggling to get members to come, then is it the best model to be using? Because surely you want a model. Ultimately, what you're each doing is about purpose and about advancing the impact of your organization. So let's be agnostic as to the type of entity that we are. Ask yourself the question, what's the best way that we can fulfill our mission and our purpose? And you might frankly need to look at yourself and say, it's no longer as appropriate because of societal changes. We're having trouble getting enough members to even have a quorum. Therefore, is it the right model for us? So I'll just leave that with all you. That's a bit of homework maybe to be thinking about, but yeah.
We've got a nice easy one. Will
Great.
it be a requirement to record membership start date on this new membership register for long-standing existing members, or where this may in some cases be unknown?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and we actually talked to MB about this. We've been liaising with them when we've got questions, and this is one of the ones that we raised, I think, about, because they were seeking input about the regulations as well, and we were asking. And I think the answer is that you don't have to record back to the original start date for the reason that you've said. Like, we know that Jane has been attending since 1970 something, but she can't remember, we can't remember when she started. So I don't think you need to do that. It's more of a from now on requirement.
You could even write in there prior to re-registration or something.
That's
like
true.
that.
Yeah.
Just to show that they've been a member for a while.
Yep.
And it's the same with the consent requirement, isn't it, Stephen? So you don't need to go and get consent from all of your existing members. It's only for new members once you re-register. Got another question which says, we are an incorporated society and charity set up back in 1988. Is it time to look at whether we are just registered as a charity?
Yeah, we are incorporated and charity. Yeah. Well, so you still have to be if you're going to be an incorporated society, you have to stay incorporated with Companies Office. So this is back to that distinction between charity services and being a charity, and incorporated societies with Companies Office. So I think you need to stay as an incorporated society in order to be an entity, which can then be a registered charity. Now, what you might be asking, it's possible, is could we not be an incorporated society and deregister as a charity, but still exist? And I think that would be possible, but I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, it's starting to get into quite detail there, though. So that person, you're welcome to send us an email and we can have a follow-up chat. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Next question is, when do we need to engage a legal firm to help with the new constitution?
This is such a self-interested answer, so you have to bear with me, right? But we would say do the homework at your end, go through your existing rules. If you have a Word version, then that's really good. Start to think about the processes which are in your rules. Ask yourself this question. We have clause 7.1F, which says we have to do this and this and this, but we've never done it. Why is it there? So there's some homework that we can't help you with, but we would suggest you go look at your rules, be really clear about why you have your rules and what they say, and then come to us. And then that's the point where we can probably add value. So you go through, you put in your comments, you change them the way you want. And then what we're often doing is reviewing those rules, giving you input. You need to have this. What about that? How about this over here? Then you can take that away and say, okay, because some of it's, you don't have to do it. Some of it's, you could do this, or you could choose not to. So you might then come back and say, well, we like this suggestion. We don't want that one. Oh, we didn't know about this, so we're happy to do that. So it's kind of an iterative process back and forth that we then customize for you to make sure you're getting what you need, ultimately, so that your organization could be fulfilling its purpose. So, yeah.
And if you don't like your rules at all, then we've got the precedent.
Yeah, we have a template. Yeah, we have a template that we've spent dozens of hours developing. So you might just say, we just want to move to that one.
Absolutely. Got two more questions.
Okay, yep.
All good.
Yep.
One of them's on financial reporting, and I wonder whether or not it'd be helpful to go to Companies Office on that one. So I'll pop the link in the chat for you.
Great.
Just because those are the number thresholds and we're not accountants, so I'll pop the link in the chat for that one. And then we had a quick question. Often charitable trusts and incorporated societies have employees that also sit on trust or committee. Is the employee then classed as a person of significant influence under the Incorporated Societies Act and Charities Act changes?
That's a great question. I think might be, because they do have a role, another role. I guess it depends what the role is that they, which hat it is that they're wearing within the organization. But why don't we look into that one?
Yeah.
Check back on our website. Here's a come back for more point. We will update our FAQ with all of these questions and all of the answers, and we will find an answer and we will put it there. So, yeah. Well, great. It's been so wonderful to have all of you join us and have a discussion. Well done to everybody who's made it through to the end of this. We hope it was helpful. Our intention is to provide information. We're a law firm that's actually helping people across the country. We're based in beautiful Otatahi, but I'm in Auckland tomorrow. I was in Wellington last week. We do a lot of work across the country. We have 80 people in our firm, so we do property and employment and all of the different issues. So thanks so much for joining us. We hope it was helpful. We'll send out the recording, the guide, and some other resources as well. And all the best in your journeys. We don't say this often enough, so keep doing the great work that each of you are doing, because it does matter, even if you can't see the result right away. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.